This is the Mind Body Detox podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom for how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back, everyone, to the Mind Body Detox podcast. I'm your host, Mind Body Medium, Kara Lovehart, and you've heard me mention in past episodes the topic of a toxin in general that's probably more apparent or more in your environment than you may know, and that is mold. And so we're specifically bringing on a guest today, Seth Jones. He is the founder and CEO of Hygia Living Corporation and the visionary behind Superstratum, and that's a patented process to remove mycotoxins. Our guest started out as an international DJ and songwriter, and he took his life down a transformative turn after experiencing building-related illness. So this is something I myself have experienced, some mold-related toxins and the symptoms. So I'm really curious to bring Seth on and talk about his experience, his journey, and they're helping over 170 million people today. So this is the mission for Hygia Living and the product line to help us become healthy in the spaces we live in. So let's bring on Seth, because we're talking about toxin-free homes today and mycotoxin-related illness. Hi there, Seth.
Hi. Good to be here.
Thanks for being here with us. So my first question for in general with your journey is, let's talk about what mycotoxins are, and then maybe go into how you started experiencing symptoms and the illness in your journey in general. But what are those for people who are not aware what mycotoxins are?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And that's a common question these days because there's been some confusion, not much awareness. And then once you have awareness, there's some confusion between the difference between mold and mycotoxins. So most people are obviously familiar with mold and fungus, right? That's a living organism that grows. But like other living organisms, it has a defense mechanism. It's competing in its environment just like other, organisms are. And its defense mechanism that it uses to compete is a poison. It's a chemical toxin that it creates. And that's primarily aimed at its main enemy, which is bacteria. And when you think about it, you can realize this because some of our antibiotics like penicillin, these are things, mycophenolic acid, these are mycotoxins that we use to fight or to suppress, bacterial issues within our own body. So the difference is that mold is a living organism, and a mycotoxin is a chemical. And that, of course, means there's some very distinct differences between those two things. One of them you can kill. The other one is not alive. And so what we found, and we'll obviously get into this, is that the things that work to kill mold are not the same things that work to actually destroy that chemical mycotoxin that's left behind. And that was a big discovery that we made. We realized that in doing work in the mold remediation industry, there was this big question of like, why are people still sick? And it's why are people even more sick sometimes when mold remediation is done in their home? And what we found was what was happening is that mold remediators would come into a home, they would remove mold, and many times they wouldn't address the entire home, which, as people are aware of, that the spores and mycotoxins have spread throughout that home. But what was also happening is they were using chemicals to kill the mold, and that mold in its kind of last fighting breath was releasing these toxins. So what was happening is they were actually leaving these buildings more toxic for a large, portion of people than they were even before they came in. And the problem with that is that up until recently, the mold remediation largely didn't even know about mycotoxins, and so you would call a mold remediator, and he may be a good mold remediator, and he would come in and they would do their testing, they would do their work, and then they would leave and say there's no mold, but they weren't testing for the mycotoxin that was left behind.
Wow. So that's something that really brings a lot of concern to me. So I'm really for my home. So I'm let's dive into this right now. I'm getting a little excited. So let's just back up and talk about your journey. What happened in your life with your personal health, and what were the routes you took to, a lot of times it's the last stop. A lot of times people, before they get to understand that this is actually a mold related illness or maybe a mycotoxin related illness. So I'd love to hear about your journey.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting story, and this this problem, I mean, there's millions of people who have stories like this and have stories that are much more extreme and severe than mine was. Mine was a little funny because I was deep into building this company before I actually realized I had the problem. However, and this is the case with a lot of people, is it's so difficult sometimes to see the pattern, to see the sickness and how this problem has developed. And we go through our everyday lives experiencing symptoms and realities in which we don't know that this is our problem, that our building is poisoning us, or that we have toxicity, or that we're being exposed to mycotoxins. And as you mentioned in your intro, I was a musician. I spent 15 years traveling the world, and I was a songwriter and producer, and I played in bands, and I was a DJ for many years, and I did that and had a really good time. And that journey led me to Los Angeles, and I had been living there for some time. And when we started this company, we met a chemist who had created a very unique technology. And this is our flagship product called our endurance coating, the Superstratum endurance coating. And this product is a very safe coating product. It's an invisible, abrasion resistant, and it's extremely water resistant. So when we found this, it is a tool that can prevent mold inside of a home for 20 years. And it's water resistant. It can get wet hundreds of times. And so, you can put it on everything from your outdoor furniture, and about 2 years, you won't have any algae or mold growing. It can get rained on. And then inside of a home, right, when you're building a home or when you've had mold remediation done, this is an incredibly powerful product. So we had some friends who had been very sick, my kind of partners and I. And so we knew that, okay, there's something missing here, right, with mold. This problem's not being solved, because we would see our friends go through this and spend tens of thousands of dollars visiting doctors, finding no solutions. And then we found this product and we said, wow, we may have a solution here. Now, we were a little naive because we didn't realize the scope of the problem. We didn't understand the barriers within the mold remediation industry, how that process worked. But also, we didn't completely understand mycotoxins. We'd heard about them. We were aware of them within food. There's been copious amounts of research done in agriculture, and these sorts of things are highly regulated. They're controlled by the Department of Defense. You can't even get these in a lab as controls unless you go through background checks and have certain clearances, because they're so dangerous. But what we found was no one, and I mean literally no one in the remediation industry even knew about mycotoxins. So when we started the company, we took this product and we got to work, and we got a big startup house, and we hunkered down and we started building the company. And it was a pretty big property. It had a house in the front that had multiple bedrooms, and there was an apartment in the back. And myself and a couple guys, we lived there and we worked. And I had just gotten out of a relationship, and in that relationship, when I met my partner, she was extremely sick, and she had hormone issues and food allergies, and she was tired all the time, and severe mental health issues and trauma issues, and she wound up becoming suicidal. And it was a very, very, very difficult experience for her and for me. As her partner, I was confused. You try and support someone through that, and that relationship ended. And sometime later, I entered into another relationship while I was living in this house. And my partner at that time, immediately, it was funny enough, she actually told me, she said, yeah, she saw us, the company. She said, yeah, when I was a kid, like, we had mold in my house, and I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think anything of her mother, having severe thyroid issues, and her father gaining weight, and issues that her sister had. And then immediately her health cratered. And it began with insomnia and pain and chronic fatigue. And then it got into dissociation. And that ultimately resulted in some very, very difficult mental health issues that turned into paranoid delusions, and her becoming convinced that I was trying to kill her. And that led to the end of our relationship. Very traumatic experience for me. I was her caretaker during that year and a half, and taking her to the doctor and all of these different things, and nothing was working. She kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Mm-hmm. And that we moved out of that house. we continued to build a company. We did our research. We discovered a solution. We worked with a lot of these players in the industry, in our little corner, and began to kind of realize what was happening. And I realized what had happened in this house. And a lot of people don't associate desert areas, dry climates, with building related illness and toxic buildings. But what I like to tell people is, the climates that we live in, there's an outdoor climate, but we create indoor climates. And by sealing up buildings and making them airtight, what we're doing is trapping air in that building. And that means we control the temperature, but it also means that moisture can't get out of that building. And when moisture is present, mold grows. And when mold grows, often it creates mycotoxins, especially if your home has dust or pets, or things where bacteria can grow, right? Because that's what's happening. It's a war. It's a microbial war. You've got mycotoxins, or you've got mold creating mycotoxins to fight bacteria. Then you have bacteria creating endotoxins, right, to fight mold. And, we live in these minefields. And so I realized this had happened. And what's common in most homes, honestly, in LA, it only rains once or twice a year. You get rain in January, and drainage is bad. There's leaks in the roof, everything leaks. And so every January it would rain, water would pour in, and a handyman would come out. Our landlord would call a handyman, and he would rip the drywall out and paint over it. And we didn't really think much of it. We couldn't smell mold. We didn't see mold really. But what was happening is that building was becoming toxic. And when I went back and talked to, there was a number of people that kind of went through that house over a few years. All of them had severe chronic illness, severe depression, gut issues. One girl went to rehab for 3 months. Substance abuse is a thing that a lot of people don't attribute to toxicity, because you're trying to mediate the effects of toxicity. And so looking back at it, I realized, oh my goodness, this was the story of the house that we lived in. But still, I didn't completely see my own journey in that, because and as you know, right, about 40% of the population, according to most Google searches, right, tells us that people that 40% cohort, has one of a few genetic conditions that make it so that our bodies can't methylate properly or detoxify. And there you go. Yep. And that explains the difference of symptoms. And when you have this hidden killer poison lurking in our buildings, you have sometimes within a home, and oftentimes within a relationship, two people who exhibit very different symptoms. Not only does it create all of the chronic illness, but now you have all the interpersonal issues of dealing with that, and the confusion, and then the confusion that turns into gaslighting, and the gaslighting that turns into extreme conflict in relationships, right? So I began to piece this together, and I went back to all the people who lived in that house. I made them aware of what had happened. They then began to heal themselves and understand. And I was helping all sorts of other people, who had the same problem. And there was she started as a client. She became a very dear friend, who had been on her own journey, almost died, spent, $200,000+, trying to get rid of the problem before she figured it out. She kind of one day very gently told me, she said, you know what, you might want to look in the mirror.
Yeah.
And it was kind of the first time where I went, oh, is my anxiety and my ADHD and all these things that had developed, like, is my writer's block in music, and all of a sudden it clicked. And I realized that, oh yeah, I may not have exhibited the kind of severe symptoms that my partner did or the other people in the home did, but I experienced toxicity as well. And that really became, the foundation for me and my personal mission, which is the mission of our company, which is around ending building related illness. I got a taste of what it's like to live in one of these homes, and I got a real taste of what it's like to be in relationship with people who are going through this in the extreme cases.
Absolutely. So it's like, when we didn't understand germ theory and like the microscope wasn't invented, we we're like, no, this isn't real. So I feel like most of this podcast, we're trying to give platforms for people like yourself that are educating about these really important things that are connecting pieces for people, especially this topic.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go on like a quick side thing here. So I work in my journey living in a house with mold and seeing all these different symptoms come up, having food sensitivities, having the genetic mutation, and having a lot of people in this house struggling with mental health issues, including myself. But along my journey, so I'm a psychic medium, and part of my journey is knowing that when you get in an altered state, so I don't care if it's through lead poisoning, which I had, I don't care if it's through mold related illness, I don't care if it's through near death experience. When you get in those states, does alter your you're either in psychosis or you're actually having spiritual experiences that are connecting with things that are, beyond our physical reality. So part of my journey and my mission as a person is to not only help people find all different ways they can detox and mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and then physically through these types of things, but watching my own journey, the people that I worked with, and then as I started to balance out, find my this is actually a thing. I'm helping people with what I do, but also seeing how other people, whether they're having these extreme mental health related symptoms to something like this or foods or whatever it is, I noticed a strong correlation between when we'd get calls for people that would come to work with me and my partner, because we're both intuitive professionals. We would have parents bring children in. I want to know if my children's psychic or if my child's psychic. And so I'm like, look, I have this fine line between this is my scope of practice. This is what I can do, what I can't do. You can bring your kid in because I know really we are trying to help the parent because there are a lot of times they're very fearful about a religious background or whatever's happening to my kid. Are they, getting possessed by demons? So, because we live in a conservative part of the country too. So I would work with these students or these clients. They were really more students because I would educate them about, I'm not here to diagnose, but I can, we can do some testing based on what I'm sensing and experiencing. Is your kid really intuitive or highly sensitive in their nervous system? And does the toxins or the related stuff making them highly sensitive, is this causing more trauma to the nervous system so that they're kind of checking out and getting disassociated, which is what happens. That whole journey was very fascinating. And then when we would go into people's houses, this is where we get the stereotype of, I have spirits in my house. Okay, cool. I'll come in. And there was absolutely multiple times where there's not anything in the house that I'm seeing going on, sensing. I'm not, you can't always smell mold, and everyone else in the house is fine. But we have, this person actually is experiencing intuition because they had a near-death experience. Or this person, I had a 17-year-old that went through a traumatic surgery. So they had trauma to the body from their surgery. So that after that, they started having like paranormal activity and stuff happening, and he's a teenager. So we helped them. But a lot of the times I would go into houses and I knew that this is a really old house. There's mold in this house. This person's struggling with mental health stuff, but there actually is, you could say, spirit activity. If we bring in all our tools, there's stuff happening here. But how much of this is always my question. I know we're kind of taking a side road when it comes to like consciousness. My whole question is, are these things that happen, where's the line between they're actually happening and they're actually your own perception of them happening? And what if these types of, what I say to people is spiritual activity or connecting to things beyond what's happening right now in your physical reality. There's no such, this is going to like really jump off topic for a second, but there's no such thing as time. And if you are in wherever you're at right now, if you could like time travel to all the different people that walked through the house or whatever, if you were kind of like taking out your perception and your doors or gates to reality and just kind of taking them away through mycotoxins, through something where you're altering your sense of perception, you could totally start to pick up different times or imprints of people or experiences. So that's why I try to explain to people. They're like, it's ghosts. Oh my God, I'm scared. I'm like, what if you're just altering your sense of reality and time right now? And through whatever means. So I just find it really interesting that a high correlation of people, they've had toxicity. And that's where I say, and like, let's educate you to not only here's how you can do to create sacred space for you, because they need the mental like wellness, the tools so they can feel in control that do support them, but also you need to detox your body. You need to go see some functional doctors. We need to get your mold related illnesses or whatever else is going on. If you have lead toxicity, whatever's happening. So that's how I feel like I don't know any other professional that's in this space that's seeing all of these pieces, because there's so many people that I would love to support, even who are self-proclaimed mediums, that have toxicity and they're not grounded. They're not in reality. They're really in a disassociated space. Unfortunately, it does make this industry kind of make us look like we're woo-woo and out there because we don't have this grounded sense of reality, but it's not their fault necessarily. So I'm just curious, I don't know if you have anything to share about that, or say you're shaking your head a lot. So I'm kind of like, I think you're on the same page in some way here, some level, but I'm curious, like, about the process of mold remediation, because I have construction workers and contractors and people that I know and I've worked with locally that they come in and they're like, there's no mold here. I don't sense it. I'm like, I'm really sensitive now, my nervous system, to things like right away. I'll sense it. And I'm like, what do they do to test? What's the normal way that they're looking at these spaces, and where are the blind spots? Because I even have someone very close to me that's a contractor that I said, there's still mold in this house. I need it to be taken care of. There's no mold here. We're taking care of it. I'm not smelling it. I'm like, no. We need to take care of this. And right around, I said this about a month ago, I was like, I gotta find somebody that can like help me. And then all of a sudden I got the request from, this is how the universe works. I got the request for you to be on the show. I was like, no, this person's coming on the show because I know there's more people out there that know more information than I do, that I can start to not only educate more people, but just share, because there's just stuff going on. So I know that was a really long side like track, but go ahead and let's just riff on that.
Yes. Yes. So this is, well, now you know someone else because, and I'll frame it up this way. We have, our bodies are made of light, and our physical bodies is the electrical side of the polarity of the universe, right? But we also have a magnetic side, the other polar force within the universe. And this is our toroidal field, right? The electromagnetic field that emanates from our entire body, from each of our organs, and from each strand of DNA. And that field is, or our bodies rather, we have 5 bodies. And if you go into the Eastern traditions, in Hinduism, they call these the koshas, or the energy sheaths, right? And now we can see our physical body, and we can feel our subtle energy body, which is the magnetic field around our body. And if our densest form of light is our electrical body, right, and our nervous system is a part of that, we go up the frequency of that light and we get to our emotional body. Above that, we have our mental body. This is the field where our thoughts register. And above that, we have our supermental body, or our astral body. And then above that, we have our bliss body. And I use the analogy, whatever you believe about source, God, the universe, right? That, most of us can agree that we come from this field. Our consciousness comes from this field. That flow of energy runs like a river down into our body, right? Through these higher frequencies down into our dense body of light, our physical body. Now, sickness and disease is a blockage somewhere along that channel of light. And people who get deep into this begin to realize it's just like you have, right? And what one of the ways that I screen people is I ask them, are you seeing ghosts? Are you experiencing demons? Right? And one quick story is, we had a customer who had seen me talk about these things, and she reached out and she said, I'm having dreams that something's trying to kill me. And I think there may be mold. And she and her partner lived in a big multi-million-dollar house. And when we went in there, we ripped the entire house apart. There was mold growing all in the walls, and they wound up being very sick, right? And mold and toxicity can affect us along that spectrum, right? So it can disrupt our physical body. It can disrupt our liver. It can disrupt our nervous system, but it can also disrupt our emotional body. It can disrupt our mental body, and it can disrupt our supermental body. And that is what we're experiencing, right? And just like you said, pre-germ theory, we couldn't see germs. We didn't know. We're in the same spot right now in with this issue, because as above, so below, as within, so without. There are physical manifestations of spiritual entities and energies and frequencies, and there are spiritual manifestations of physical objects, right? So this sensitivity that we have, or that some people have when they can walk into a building, there's a chemical reality to that, right?
Yes.
Or a let's call it chemical. There are physical molecules that might be a mold, it might be a toxin, but those molecules have a frequency. They have a field, and that field can exist separate from the physical body. And the manifestation of those energy bodies can be things like toxins, parasites, molds, right? And I like to say this. A lot of people have a lot of different opinions about demons and the paranormal, but if we take simply the mythological understanding of a demon, right? What is it? It is a separate energy body that invades our bodies, our light bodies. It influences us. It controls our mind. It disrupts, right? It takes energy from us. That is quite literally what these things are in the physical realm. And the experience of that, right, can be supernatural, can be spiritual. And this, I'm so glad we're going down this bunny trail, because this is really my passion. We work with people, in the physical plane. There's a reason why religious traditions have purity rituals, purity codes, ritual cleaning. You open up the Bible, right? You see these things. We don't really make sense. Well, that's because what we've lost in the modern world is the understanding that our environment creates us. Literally, it creates us. This is epigenetics, right? So that happens on a physical realm. If you're surrounded by dust and mold and toxins, those invade your body. They create an acidic environment for everything to take hold. And you get all of these, cofactors that emerge, like Lyme, like it depresses your immune system. But that happens in the spiritual realm as well. And what a lot of people don't understand is that the experience of toxicity is often not what you think. If we think about trauma, and I saw this firsthand in my relationships, and women, we could talk about women because they are a key in this. They tend to be much more intuitive. They're disproportionately affected by this. They spend more time in the home, right? And so what happens is, if you have trauma, well, what is that in the brain? And that could be childhood trauma, it could be sexual trauma, it could be trauma from a surgery, which one of my partners had. It could also be traumatic brain injuries, right? This is inflammation in the brain, right? This is actually a physical injury in the brain. So when you get toxicity in the body and in the brain, because these mycotoxins cross the blood-brain barrier, they get into the brain. Well, they poke at and they inflame those weak areas in the body. And that's why everyone exhibits differently, because we're all built differently. We all have different injuries, so to speak. We all have different weaknesses based on our genetics or our environment, our epigenetics. And that, again, if we think about this river, the place where the water flows, where the blockage happens, is the place that's already injured. So what oftentimes the experience of toxicity is the flaring up or the experience of your childhood trauma, of what happened to you when you were a child, right? Of migraines from your TBI, whatever it is, right? And that can push up into the field and create these experiences that you're talking about. And what is so interesting about this type of sickness, chronic illness specifically, is that healing from chronic illness is not, you can't go to a doctor to heal from this. There's not a pill, there's not a medicine, right? Because pharmaceuticals and chemicals address chemicals, right? So, but that's the last stage of the construction of reality, so to speak, right? What often happens, and what I think it's so important for people to understand, especially people who are experiencing this, is that intuition is your body's intelligence. It is the intelligence of not just your physical body, but of your higher bodies telling you what's happening. And what happened in in my case with my partner is, and this actually, it was the most difficult and the most traumatic thing that I've ever been through in my life. But it showed me something. And I began to see this over and over and over with women, particularly when you are being poisoned in your environment and you don't know what's poisoning you. And when people are telling you, no, that's not
You
that.
don't feel safe. You don't feel
You
safe.
don't
And
feel
then you don't feel safe. And no matter who's your partner, no matter who's the person,
yes,
they're not going to make you feel protected, and you're going to lash out and you're going to
yes.
completely
And that,
project onto them.
yes. And that is actually a healing mechanism, because what had happened was my partner was living in an environment that was actually killing her. I wasn't the enemy. I wasn't trying to kill her, but the psyche will split, and it will project out onto the closest people to you or your environment that they're trying to kill you, so that you'll run away, so that you will get out of that environment, right? And again, when you're in that, it is the most traumatizing, confusing thing that can happen, not just for the person who's sick, but for the person who's being projected onto, right? Who is oftentimes just loves that person, wants to care for that person, is trying to help that person. But it's a beautiful mechanism, actually, that we have within us to get us out of that environment. And I began to see that over and over and over. And I would have women come to me who would be suffering from this, and I would ask them, tell me about the relationship. I met someone else who had a similar experience. She left a marriage and she lost a child to this, and she ran away. And I told her, she still had no idea that it was her building that was poisoning her. And there was this realization that that was the thing that actually saved her, was this intuitive knowing that something is trying to kill you. And just this week, I was in a conversation with another friend, and we were talking about this, and I brought it up, and she goes, that's so crazy. This happened twice this week, actually. I lived in an apartment and I just didn't feel safe. I didn't know why. There was nothing wrong with it. It was just, there was an energy in that building in which I just knew I couldn't be alone. And I didn't want, and she said, I moved out. I broke my lease and I left. And it's, healing from chronic illness, healing from building related illness, it's a spiritual awakening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what governs our life are voices of authority and imagined hierarchies. And when you live in a reality, in a matrix of institutions, doctors, health agencies, remediators, contractors, people who are telling you, oh, you're fine. Oh, there's no mold. Your husband, right? Oh, you're just get up, go work out, go get out, right? It requires an immense amount of power and force and your own voice to be able to step up and say, you're wrong, to push away from that gaslighting, right? And it's not always intentional, but to push away from those voices and to find your own knowing and say, I may not even know what it is, but I know that my voice that's telling me this is true. And I know what you're telling me is not. And that oftentimes means an entire collapse of someone's ego, of someone's life, of someone's relationship, of families, of politics, of anything, right? Because those are the authority structures that actually keep us sick.
Yeah. You're speaking so much my language, and this is like so exciting for me because the last 6 months, the podcast guests that I've been bringing on, I'm getting really attuned even more so to not bringing people on that just don't feel in alignment even more. Because so I run a holistic clinic for the last 13 years, and the podcast is named after my program. And the program, the beginning of it, I was like, how do I convince people that you're just energy? Especially where I live. And it was just before, our whole spiritual awakening of the collective trauma of COVID, which is why it happened. It's really just trauma, everybody, and I teach trauma-informed massage therapy. So most of my education is helping people understand what trauma does to the body, to the psyche. And really, so my perception has been, I saw auras when I was a kid. Little do we know, it's probably the house and the lead poisoning that I found out much later, right? Cool stuff to be able to have that. But then in my journey was all the mental health diagnosis. Let's get on medications. Nothing worked. Long story short, came back to where I'm at now, where it's like, this is actually a thing. very specific with my diet. I have to clean up everything. And as I did, everything became very clear. And I started to see this distortions. You talk about the energy bodies, the distortions in people's energy fields visibly in their aura. And so I was working at a chiropractor full time. I worked there for about 8 years, and there was 200 people a day. It was a high volume practice. So I would get this language for seeing people come in. This is their aura. This is what they're telling me. And then getting an idea of what their psyche's doing, having these one-on-one conversations with them, and then having this understanding of what's going on medically. So I built this kind of medical intuitive language with it. And then I started to see you can actually shift your field. All of these are distortions, whether it's on a spiritual level, and all of you say as above, so below, if it's just physical toxins, but they're all the same thing, just showing up in different ways. And I love so much that I found few and far between, at least until this last 6 months, have I found other professionals that not only get all of this full spectrum of the reality of what we're trying to do on this podcast and in the program I offer, that this is really how it's all layered. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I said, look, I've been spent 10 years trying to let's break it down. Let's talk about the chakras and the things that are buzzwords that people's psyches are able to hear because it's westernized and it's safe. I had to do a lot of that. Yeah. And now I'm like, no, this is, if people are still afraid, that's their in trauma response. And there's nothing I can do to get them out of it other than continue to live in a space of love and education and not polarization about right or wrong. These are just perspectives to share when someone's ready for it. So I am super stoked, beyond, to talk to you about this. So I kind of want to go into the specifics about the way that they're testing. What are the general contractors doing, and what's different about how, if someone's like, well, you're getting gaslit or unintentional, like you said, your partner, whoever, there's no mold here. How do you then come back and say, this is actually here? We can test it with this versus whatever you were using here doesn't actually show up. So what do you guys do for that in your organization?
Yeah, great question. So going back to this difference between mold and mycotoxins, right? It's very important for people to understand these are two separate things, and they have to be addressed differently. Now, there's lots of testing out there right now for mold, and this is what mold remediators do, environmentalists typically do. Now, we can go deep into mold testing and all, there's all sorts of things out there. Every test has its limitations, right? And one thing that I tell people is, you can't rely too much on this type of testing data, because you go to the doctor, right? And they do your blood work and they say, oh, you're fine, right? Same thing can happen, right? No. What's more important is, how do you feel? What is your body telling you, right? And you're exactly right. If you feel like there's still mold in that environment, there's a very, very good chance that there's still mold in that environment, because mold is very difficult sometimes to find, very difficult, even if you've got a good environmentalist, even a good remediator. So there's a lot of room for error there. And I know people and families, people who have died, right, because of this, because they didn't find the mold. So on the mold side, you can miss there. Now, moving into the mycotoxin side, there are very few environmentalists who are aware of mycotoxins and who test for mycotoxins. There was no mycotoxin test until just recently. So there was no way to determine if there were mycotoxins, really, from a chemical perspective in that building. And this is really the sensitivities that people have. It's for people who are sensitized, who have that cellular defense response that happens when they get exposed to toxins. The levels, the parts per billion, it's like a dog's nose, right? That's how sensitive we are. It's not about smelling. It's about your body and physically, but energetically, exactly like you're saying. These things have fields, right? So when your nervous system is exposed to that field, your body alerts you because it has the morphogenetic memory of that trauma, right? And, we use this word morphogenetic. I think it's important for people to understand. We typically think of DNA, if we even understand a field, right? We think that DNA emits that field. But DNA is the construction of chemicals within the field. This is why things get passed down in generations, because the energy is not, the information rather, is not in the chemical. The information is in the field, right? That's why, I use this really simple analogy. There was a brilliant doctor who I heard say this one day, and all disease, I'm going to say it again, all disease is from toxicity. Now, that toxicity might be a mold, might be a bacteria, maybe a mycotoxin, a heavy metal. It might be an emotional toxin, right? It could be a toxin up the frequency. It also may not be from toxicity in your own life. It might be toxicity from someone in your line, right? And the memory of that toxicity has been passed down, and it's congenital, right? Or it expresses itself genetically. But all of our sickness comes from a disruption from toxicity. Now, toxicity creates deficiency. That deficiency, it takes something that the cell needs, right? Or in the case of an emotional toxin, it's easy to understand. A child is in a family, the father's abusive, right? The child is deficient in the love that it needs, okay? Deficiencies create adaptations. We all want to survive. Every cell wants to survive. So the cell adapts its behavior. It changes the way it functions in the deficient environment so that it can survive. The child develops a different personality, right? Sometimes it even splits the personality when it becomes so extreme. And that's what happens in cases of extreme trauma, right? It's actually a beautiful mechanism to protect the psyche, to protect the individual from that trauma. But that adaptation, if the cell cannot remove itself from the environment, if the child cannot get out of that relationship, then the adaptation becomes encoded as a mutation, right? The field then registers that information so that when that cell copy pastes, when that child has another child, the child of the toxic individual has the adaptation encoded so that it can continue that behavior to exist in that environment that's toxic, okay? The mutation creates the symptom. Now, Western medicine, you go to a doctor, what are they doing? They're looking at the symptom. They're treating the symptom. The symptom is the signal. The symptom is just telling you that up the chain that there's a problem in the environment. There's something that's causing this blockage, right? It's like seeing the ripples in the laminar flow of the coherence of the light, right, that comes down, okay? And even in functional medicine, right, even in people who understand this, what are they doing? We're talking about supplementation. We're talking about supplementing deficiencies. And there's a place for supplements and binders and these things. You have to remove the toxin from the environment, but ultimately it's the mutation. It's the morphogenetic information that the cell has that perpetuates the symptom. And that's why it's so difficult to heal from these kinds of things, because you do all the right things, you go see all the right doctors, and then you step into a building that has these toxins or these fields in them, and boom, you're right back. Your body goes right back to that memory of the sickness. And, just this simple understanding gives you the simple path towards healing. Number one, the environment. Yeah. You have to fix the environment.
I have like an example that might be supportive for people to maybe wrap their head around what you're just saying, because I'm completely following you. This is, so for an example, like you're talking about, let's just talk about energy fields and the information. I say energy, I call it an energy signature. Something's carrying an energy signature. And so in a particular space, not only is there energy signature of people who lived there and the history of those people and their fights and their joys and all that, but then you talk about the physical frequency and energy signature of the mycotoxins or the molds or the toxins. All those things are there. And if you have a particular home, it starts to imprint a particular, that's why you can go in different homes as a sensitive, like this feels like this, I get this sensation here, oh, this happened here. And our home has a really particularly interesting frequency. I have 5 generations in this home. This has been my house for 5 generations in my family. Wow. 5 generations of women have been widowed here in this house. I'm the person in my journey, my personal journey, with all of the things I'm doing to break that. So it's interesting because, there was still the energy of, I need to get out of here. I'm not safe here. because the mycotoxins, but also there's the loneliness, there's the grief, there's this frequency, this energy of information that's here, that's carried here. So all of this work in physically detoxing, diet change, lifestyle, but energy medicine. So I do a lot of energy medicine practice and meditation, but then also on like a deeper level, like how do you work with the epigenetics? How do you work with your genetic, that's something that I think that for some people, it may seem a little bit woo-woo and out there. We don't necessarily have proof of these expressions being able to be changed, but I think if you can change the field, you can change it. And so I actually got different types of frequency devices to put in my home, because it wasn't until I got one of the Somovedic devices. I don't know if you know what that is, but I got this device because I thought no matter what I do, like I have a really good steady balance of energy flow. I'm really consistent with my practices. And then all of a sudden, you say, oh, well, maybe it's just the hormonal shifts as a woman. And then I go back and I'm not capable to be consistent with it or whatever it is. When I got this device and put it in the home, and different spiritual practices, you can say I connected with my ancestors. This is very spiritually in ceremony and plant medicine, to work with my shaman and my people to help. Let's connect the dots here, because there is a lineage of women that are feeling alone and scared and really not in a place of feeling empowered. So the frequency of that, like not just the spiritual practice, but even these devices, I fully believe since I've used those, they've shifted things so much. And also if you have not listened to our episode with the neuroscientist, Dr. Alia, we actually talk about the different levels on which trauma gets impacted on a soul level, on an epigenetic level, on a history level, and then just from collectively, from ancestrally. And these are all things that do affect the epigenetics. And we go into, she was another amazing guest. I'll have to send you the episode if you're interested. Yeah. But we talk about, because she's just like me, I want the science, I want the third dimensional stuff, but I want this really, like, how are we going to connect these things for other people in language that can be like, oh my gosh, I think I get it. And we talk about just the abstract nature and the complexity of the epigenetics and the electromagnetic fields and quantum physics, and we go into that. So I just wanted to kind of give that as an example. I've shifted my life, even though we've done all this work. Like you said, it is very challenging to cure a chronic illness, because you're not just working with it on a physical level. I had to do all these different levels. And that's what I try to teach in my program, bit by bit, because everyone's at a different stage in their healing, and they might need different tools at different times, because it can be overwhelming. But this is why I try to convince people. I'm not here to convince anyone anymore. I'm like, this is actually how it is. Like, this is how it is. And a lot of people get stuck in the mental body, right? They get stuck in the mental. Well, this is the program I'm doing, or this is the product I'm taking, or the supplement I'm taking. I did that for 6 months, and now I'm going to do something different. And then maybe I do need to do something different that time. But it seems like there's a lot of mental searching consistently. I want new information. I want another thing. But I think it's because I think a lot of us as a culture, and I don't know if this is to be true, are locked in a mental block, the mental state. Because we're not actually embodying, because when we have to get into the body, and it all shifts everything else. When you have distortions in one layer of the energy field, it's going to affect everything, the above layers the below. So I think that is where, if there's any way to communicate that, but if you've done the mental processing and the spiritual work and the whatever journey stuff you're doing with learning mentally, it's time to bring it into the body. And I think if you've only worked with the body, it's time to expand it out to the spiritual. So that's my soapbox for that.
Yeah.
But
that's really interesting, because, in my own journey, right, I mold and toxicity affects my mental field, and it essentially scrambles these spectrums of frequencies. And so it can make them overactive. That's why, right, when it attacks the supramental field, you get these intuitive abilities, because you become oversensitized. You lose grounding in the electrical, physical, three-dimensional reality, and you get an overactivity in these higher energy bodies. And, I am the kind of person, I mean, a lot of people will hear me talk now, and they're like, oh, he's so woo-woo. I didn't get there through my intuition. I got there through the 3D physical realm. And I discovered a book called The Universal One by a man named Walter Russell, and a whole fascinating story about him in this book. It's essentially a treatise on metaphysics and the nature of reality, and how everything is light and everything is the mind of God, and everything is thinking in the mind of God, and how the thinking and the motion of that mind is what creates reality, as it creates the difference of the appearance of the one substance, which is light, right? So I followed this mental intuition, this kind of breadcrumb trail into frequency. And I started to have this belief, right? This curiosity that, wait, there's something else going on here other than the chemical properties. I mean, our team is chemists, and we work in labs and that sort of thing. And through that, I met a researcher who is now my partner, and she works with the body. She was a Western doctor who very, very brilliant, has more degrees than years I went to school. And she's finishing an incredible dissertation, her PhD. And she does works with a frequency device that is able to scan the body, not just in the physical energy spectrum, or not just in the electrical energy spectrums, but in the biophotonic spectrums as well, the higher energies of light. And that scans all of the bodies. And when I did it for the first time, of course, it blew my mind, right? As you have that experience, you're like, wait, how in the world could you know that I'm getting up to go to the bathroom at this time, that I get a runny nose, when I eat, that this, brings in Western medicine and Eastern medicine and psychology and quantum physics into this coherent, narrative so that it can be understood. And when we began to work together, what I found was this is how you can begin to heal these things, that there is a physical, scientific explanation for what many people experience. It's just that the paradigm of the world that we tend to accept is wrong, right? So the lens we're looking through doesn't give us the perspective on what's actually happening. There is an explanation for it. It's not inexplicable, right? There is a scientific explanation. And because this awareness is happening, because you and I can meet for the first time and have this conversation, and we can speak the same language, we have the same experience, people are beginning to understand this. And this is what became, the key to my healing, and the key to so many other people's healings that I had been working with, who had been going to doctors for years, who were dying, who knew that it was mold, but who couldn't get better and were getting worse. And this treatment is very, very interesting. It essentially takes water, and the physics of water is a whole other rabbit hole, right? But you can program water to hold specific electromagnetic frequencies, which is light. That frequency is information, right? If pharmaceuticals and chemicals address the current cell, right, that cell is just copy pasting. Your liver reproduces every cell in 8 weeks. So why do we have chronic liver issue? Well, it's because it's a mutation in the cell, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't fix that with chemicals. You can't fix that with medicine, right?
It's going to recreate based on the frequency, what's around it. And if the other cells are still vibrating at that frequency, the genetic code is in that space. That's what it's going to express.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And but you can give the cell the quantum information, the light code, so to speak, that it needs to go, oh, that's the correction. That creates harmony in the cell. And again, I'm a musician, right? So I'm not a physicist. I don't have all these degrees, but I understood what was happening because I understand music. And music is exactly the same. All wave theory is the same, right? Waves in the air are the same as waves of light. So I use the analogy to say, if this river of light, right, is waves, is energy, it's as if your liver, for instance, is a symphony of billions of cells, and each strand of DNA has a field. It's playing a note, it's playing a chord, right? And that chord, when it's in harmony, or in physics terms, it's in coherence with that energy, that creates harmony in the system, or health. When there's dissonance, right? You're listening to that symphony and, oh, I can still hear the song, but something sounds funny, right? What is it? That's what this process does. It scans it and says, oh, the third trumpets have gone a little flat, right? And then you can say, okay, well, what causes the trumpets to go 50 cents flat? Well, there is a toxin or a mold that has that specific frequency that's disrupting the Fibonacci proportions of these waves. It's all math, right? To within that symphony of light that's happening in your body. So again, this is healing. This is the new age of where we're going. And when
Yes.
you give your body that information, and in this case, it's a couple of drops of water every day. There's no chemicals in it, right? It supports, it gives the cell the information that it needs so that when it goes to create that new cell, it's not creating the damaged cell. It comes back into tune and it rejoins that symphony in quantum coherence in your body.
I love it. We're going to have to talk more about your partner. This is like fantastic. So if you guys are really curious about this topic, we'll see if we can maybe bring her on, but go back and listen to the color puncture episodes. So I do a modality that is working with biophoton frequency in the field. So what we do is we use a device to measure the fingers and the toes and look at the biophoton emissions off the fingers and the toes. And then we do testicular treatments it's needleless acupuncture with light and frequency. And again, when I first found the modality, I'm like, this is exactly, and it combines all the things from the physical functional approach to Eastern traditions and also even the energy stuff. And even we talk about more of the esoteric stuff like astrological imprints and how those affect people's personalities and what might be showing up for disease or, imbalances in their field. So it's completely comprehensive. And this is what I get I get really lit up about this stuff because this is what we have been looking for. We as an evolution in our consciousness as a species are now zoomed out enough to start seeing and bringing these other pieces so we can innovate the way that we live and the way that we heal. And I love it so much. So are there any particular, let's go and move into any preventative measures that we can take, if you're experiencing symptoms or you're having stuff, or even what could they do to check, what would be the steps you would say to someone? They're like, if they're listening to this podcast, is like, I am really excited about this. What do I do? What are preventative measures? And, are there any lifestyle factors even that I can do to support myself?
Certainly. Yeah. So we'll start kind of with the base level. And I'll talk a little bit about our products and our solutions and what we've developed. So we actually just launched a mold and mycotoxin detection kit. And this is really what we tell people, this is the first step, right? Now, some people, they have that intuition. They don't know. They want to move straight to the solution. And we'll talk about that. But for people who this is resonating, they're going, wait, do I have this problem? I need to see something, right? This detection kit, they can go on our website, superstratum.co, and our shop there. And this is it has a mold test, but it's not meant to be comprehensive. It's meant to find what spores are in the environment that you spend the most time or where you feel sick, and then to detect the chemical toxin that's there, because different molds create different mycotoxins. You need that full picture. And without going too deep into the testing, there's some tests out that are antigen protein based, like PCR tests, like the COVID test, right, which has some limitations. We use a process called liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry, and that eliminates false positives. It's very, very accurate. When you're specifically testing things like molecular weight, you're looking at the chemical itself. So that is available on our website. It's a Superstratum mold and mycotoxin detection kit. Now, I'll talk a little bit about our products and our system that we've developed. Again, going back to the idea that mold is separate from mycotoxins. The first thing that you do in an environment is you find the intrusion of water. What's causing the mold to grow? That could be a musty basement. That could be an HVAC system and a condensate line that's backed up. It could be a leak. It could be high humidity, right, that's creating this. It could be your lifestyle, right? You don't clean enough, right? We've lost the lifestyle things that make us sick, right? The rituals. But you want to figure out what's causing that in the building so that you can stop it. Once it's stopped, you need to fix the mold problem. You have to remove the mold. Now, there's a lot of things out there about that. There's some companies that come in and say, we'll just fog the house and spray and it'll kill everything and you'll be fine. No. Doesn't work that way. You have to remove the mold. And oftentimes what can happen when you do that is you don't kill that mold, but you aggravate it. And so you make that building more toxic. And we work with a lot of people who are in that situation. So you want to find a good mold remediator, and you want to make sure they're using the right chemicals that aren't going to cause additional sensitivity. No quaternary ammonium salts. They want to use things like hydrogen peroxide, peracetic acid, right? Now those are still harsh chemicals, but they will kill the mold, and you want to remove that mold. Now, when the mold is removed, now you need to address toxicity in the building, right? The entire building envelope. And this is why we developed a Superstratum system. We were the first company to prove within a lab, third-party lab that we worked with, that our product can destroy a mycotoxin. It breaks down that chemical, and it will do it on contact. So our system is a 3-phase system. The first phase, we have a product called our Superstratum Building Cleaner. That is a chemical. It's a special type of hypochlorous acid. And that hypochlorous acid is designed to destroy the chemical. Now that acid, you hear that word and you're like, uh-oh, is that a dangerous chemical? Well, actually, your body makes it. Your white blood cells make it. You don't even need PPE to use it in a house. In fact, this chemical is very commonly used now in cosmetic products. A lot of women are now buying this to spray on their face because it kills bacteria, protects so it's very safe. We've never met someone who's had a sensitivity to this product. So it's fantastic, right? So phase 1, you fog the entire building, get on all the surfaces. Then in our protocol, you want to do a micro clean, a wipe down. Every bit of dust, every surface in the home, you want to wipe it down with our building cleaner. That part is very important because you're trying to remove the physical contaminants that contain those mycotoxins, but also mycotoxins are very sticky. They stick to walls, they get on everything. It's like a fire. If you can imagine a fire happening in your house and everything getting covered in smoke, that's what a mycotoxin contamination is. So that's phase 1, fogging and cleaning. Phase 2 uses a product that's called our Superstratum Deodor Balm. Now, this is a little dry sponge that has chemicals in it. And when you add water to it, it creates chlorine dioxide gas. Now, chlorine dioxide is nature's most powerful oxidation chemical. It has not been used very commonly because it's very difficult to deliver effectively in gas form. But our technology actually delivers a very specific amount of it at a very specific rate. And so you take these products, you put it all over the home in the different rooms. Now, this is a poisonous gas. You have to be out of the home. You remove your pets and your plants. You leave the home overnight, and you let the whole building fill up with this gas. This gets back into all the places that you can't see. It can get into the walls. It gets into the pillows and the soft goods, your clothing. So, we tell people, hang up all your clothes, pull everything out. You want that gas to penetrate, and that gets into the places that you can't see. Now, both of these products, hypochlorous acid and chlorine dioxide, when they're done, they break down into salt, right? So you may be left with a little bit of salt, but there's no toxic chemicals that are left behind. And through the oxidation mechanism of that electron transfer, what's happening is it's attacking the unsaturated bonds in a toxin. And if you look at the chemical structure of toxin, you'll see that. It looks like a little circle, and it has these double lines in it. It grabs that electron and it unrolls, and it starts that process of breaking the chemicals down. So after phase 2, you come back, you can open up all the doors and the windows, you air the building out, the gas leaves the building. And then the third phase is our endurance coating, the product that I talked about that we started our company with. You go and you can spray that onto all the places where moisture can be present or might be present again. If you've got like, oh, I get condensation around the windows and mold grows, or you can put it inside the HVAC system, and it will last for many years and stay there and be resistant to any mold that lands on that coating. So that process is what's called our whole home system. It costs about $1 per square foot to do it yourself. In the journey of our company, we first went into the professional industry, and we have professional customers. There are great mold remediators and cleaning companies and environmentalists who are seeing this problem. They want to solve it, right? They use our products and recommend our products. But what we found was we need to skip this. We need to go directly to the people who need this. So we've developed it as a DIY system. You can get on our website. We have an order wizard that automates the whole process. So you can create a profile, create your home, enter in all the different dimensions of all the rooms, and then it will create a custom order of your product, and then you'll get custom instructions on how to perform that. Now, once you have cleaned the mycotoxins and detoxified the building, and this will not just destroy the mycotoxins, but odors and inanimate contaminants, all the things that live in our building, right? Or exist in our building. Once that's done, now you have to maintain that environment. And this is where we get back to our spiritual health, our spiritual reality, right? What are the things that we do every day, right? Do we get enough sunlight, right? Do we get enough fresh air? Are we living, is our home too dark? Is our home full of moisture? Do we live in relationship to animals in such a way that we have dander, we have bacteria that grows, right? These are things that people get it's difficult to talk about sometimes. And one of the biggest things that we see with people is, when this happens, right? When you get toxicity into the body, it creates an acidic environment, which means that parasites can grow, right? Now, parasites, these are energy bodies. They have their own consciousness. And we know this if you study parasite theory. It's well documented within animals. Parasites release neurotransmitters and chemicals. They control your mind, and they control it in a way to perpetuate their own life cycle, right? They want you to stay in that building. They want to put you in a state of mind where you hoard things, where you keep all these paper goods in cardboard boxes so that mold can grow. They want you under the covers. They want you to stay sick. They want you to think that your sickness is who you are, right? So what we're talking about here is even more. And that's why we called our company Hygia Living. Hygia was a Greek goddess. And she was in the pantheon, and she was the goddess of health and hygiene, preventative health specifically, right? Because they understood that staying healthy is a lifestyle. It's a ritual practice. It is a relationship with God. It's a relationship with ourselves and our environment. So, we also have products that are more daily use products. We have an everyday cleaner, which is a more diluted version of our building cleaner. We have spray bottles that have our endurance coating. We encourage people to create this lifestyle of cleanliness, develop a ritual of cleaning. And then we can, get into air purification and ionization and these types of things. But that's the biggest process, right? Fix the water intrusion, remove the mold, and then detoxify the home. And, I would tell people, our team, I like to say we're the Ferrari, right? We have a very extensive process because these problems can be very difficult to get out. And you want to make sure the mold is out because you don't want to run this process before, right? Before you have the mold out, because you could aggravate the mold and you have to run it again, right? But we also want to give people solutions for where they are. And that's a big part of what we do and what our team does, is to work with people to say, okay, you can't move. Maybe you can't afford mold remediation right now. Maybe you can just do one part of the home. Maybe you can't do the whole process, but let's set the right expectation, and let's put the tools and the right knowledge and information in your hand so that you can make a couple of steps for your health and for your family's health, and to create that environment where your body then can heal itself, because that's the game. Right? The game, we're healing our environments so that our bodies can begin this process of healing. Our bodies are healing machines. It's the only thing they're designed to do. You get a cut and it heals itself. What's more magical than that, right? Our entire body, our brain is that way. Our organs are that way. Our whole body is that way. The only thing that we need to begin that process is the right environment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I'm so grateful, and I'm really curious. The listeners, send us your feedback. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are on questions about this. So I do have final questions for you that I ask every guest with their first time visiting on the show. And the first one is, what's your favorite wellness product or topic, or maybe like a self-indulgence that you're taking part in at this time?
Yeah, great question. Well, obviously I'm a little biased to our own products, but let's take those out of the picture. And the researcher that I mentioned, one of the things that we've been working on is taking this process and developing a product. So we actually just launched a new brand called Building Balance. And one of the things that we found is that people who are in these environments, these energetic environments, mold and toxins usually go one of two ways. There's two channels that it flows. It goes towards the liver and attacks the liver and creates all of those issues, or it goes towards the nervous system. And as we began to work with people who had building related illness to help support them, we found that the frequencies that these people needed to support their nervous system wound up being the same. So we created a product that is, again, it's just water. There's no chemicals in it, but it's been programmed with the specific frequencies to support the nervous system. And we have had people who have had, miraculous results from that. And, hopefully we can talk about that. We can bring her on and talk more, but that is one of the things I encourage people to say. It's like, if you feel all out of sorts, if you're trying to figure out what to do, you need your brain, right? You need your nervous system to be regulated. So that's a great first step. And I really encourage people they can find that on our website as well in the Superstratum shop, to get a little bottle of that product and start using it. And that can help give you some grounding so that, you can make the right decisions and take the right steps going forward.
That's awesome. I love it. I'm looking forward to looking at that.
Yeah.
So the final question, if you could detox one thing in your life or the world right now, what would it be?
Do I have to pick just one?
You can pick a few, but what are the things that you really think that we really could do, with just really either bringing awareness to is a mental detox process or anything just in general?
Yeah. Well, I think that because of the environment that we all live in collectively, everything is poisoning us, right? Our food, our vaccines, our air, the media, right? And let's put those to the side and say, okay, this is the environment that we live in. What was very important in my life is detoxing from the things, and this is still a process for me. This is not a on-off switch. This is, again, a lifestyle. It's detoxing from the medications that we take to alleviate the symptoms of our toxification. Now, those medications can be things like SSRIs and antidepressants, right? Because like you said, we've got an overactivity up in these higher frequencies, and we take these chemicals that affect the chemical balances in our bodies and our brains in order to try and bring some balance into that. And I think that as a whole, we are under this illusion that these things create healing within our bodies, right? And they don't. They obviously can create lots of other problems. The trade-off is they change us. They change our personalities. They change our behaviors. They change our bodies. The other medications that we use, things like alcohol, cannabis. Cannabis was the thing for me. I lived in California. It was the only thing I could grab to start to regulate my mental field and my nervous system. And that was something that I had to detox from. And we live in an environment where everybody's vaping, everybody's using something, right? And what I also like to tell people is this is not about morality or judgment. It has nothing to do with that, right? These are medicines. And in many ways, I credit cannabis with saving me because it served me for a time, right? But what happens is our sense of identity and self becomes melded with these things. They become us. And then we adapt these personalities. We adapt these lifestyles as who we are. And oftentimes those become the things that prevent our true healing because we're throttling our body's ability to do that work and detoxify itself. So, on a day like today and what we've all just lived through, one of the biggest things is the media, right? The media toxin and how that infects our emotional field and our mental field. So I would say, if I could flip a switch and safely, detoxify this from everyone's life, it would be all of these things that we use to modulate the effects of toxicity so that we can get a break in the clouds and realize, oh, I'm not sick. I'm not depressed. I'm not all of these things. I'm living in toxicity, or I'm living a lifestyle that is encouraging me to reach for that thing so that I don't feel the effects of my body signaling to me that there's something wrong.
Absolutely, hands down. That's completely my answer. It's anything that's your crutch, that is your avoidance. It's the thing you can keep putting your head into the sand as like your ostrich. We're just gonna not, because we can't do that anymore. And I think from a collective perspective, looking at what's happening in our world with polarization, with the environment, with just we're destroying ourselves. And part of my toxin more recently was my actual that I had to let go of was because my reaction, because we always have what is our crutch? Why are we doing something? Why do we have a behavior, whatever it is, that's serving us in some way? Mine was actually creating a guard around my heart, a protection around my heart, around my love, around my compassion, because I had lost that for the world. Like I was resentful towards, why aren't people doing something? We're going to destroy ourselves. Why are you doing this? And then it became clear to me, this is still an us versus them. This is still a creation of separation. This is still not honoring my true highest value, which is freedom, love, and truth. So wait a minute. And how is it serving me? To protect me from getting hurt again by people who are maybe more operating from a place of unconsciousness because of the toxicity, because they're not, no, there's a lack of understanding and awareness there. Maybe on some level, from a higher consciousness standpoint, there's some sort of awareness, but there's something that, if we just allowing ourselves to continue to hide, we won't ever find happiness. We really have so much. There's so much potential right now. And to kind of end on a high note, there's so much potential right now for transformation and change and collective awakening, personal awakening. And I encourage you, if you liked this episode, like this show, any information that you love out there that you feel that you want to share, sharing it with love, not with this is the right way. You need to do these things and trying to convince your friend, because you're not going to convince them, gentle, love, that, not forcing. But I feel like that is the biggest thing that we can do right now with this information. So anyhow, anything else you want to share before we head out for the episode?
I think that's it. I think we've covered the gauntlet.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, all right, guys, thank you so much again. We appreciate you being here, Seth. And again, thank you all for listening. Be well until next time, my friends. Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox podcast. If you love this podcast, share it with others and leave us a review. Your reviews help us more than you know and supports us continuing to make episodes and being heard from all over the world. You can also follow the link in our show notes to submit a topic that you would like to hear on the show.